Okay, members and officers, it is 2 o'clock, so we'll make a start. So can I welcome all the members and officers to this hybrid meeting of the Cross-Cutting Resources and Business Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is able to be viewed live by members of the press and public today. Therefore, may I welcome anyone that may be watching remotely. A recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's webcasting and YouTube channels after the meeting has concluded, should anyone else wish to view it. Please be aware that this meeting is being transcribed only for the purpose of producing the minutes. The transcript will be deleted once the committee approves the minutes. The transcript should not be downloaded by anyone other than Democratic Services. To confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I've not received any notification or request for Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you wish to speak. Please could you also keep your microphones muted when not talking so there aren't any interruptions encountered. Can I also remind members that as per statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by the members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing this meeting, either now or after. So can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting. If you have any problem, please actually send a message through to Democratic Services. So, moving on to the agenda, could you confirm if we received any apologies?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. We've received apologies from Councillors Catherine Bonera, Norma Parish, Caroline Price and Jason O'Connell.
Thank you very much. Anyone else aware of any other apologies? No? Okay, we'll record that. Thank you. So, moving on to item 2, which is the declaration of interest. Can I ask members to state whether they have any declaration of interest to make at this time? I see no hands. Of course, we all have an interest in the budget, but you know what I mean. So, point 3, item 3, the confirmation of minutes which were held on the 18th of November 2025. Members, are you happy to approve these minutes as an accurate record? Yes? Yes? Okay, that's confirmed. I see no... Anyone against? No, I don't see anyone. Okay, we move on. Action sheet. You'll have seen that the action sheet, all the items have been covered in terms of papers, responses given to members. So we'll move on then to the substantive item for this scrutiny, which is the financial planning update, number 5. So the report provides an update on the Welsh Government's final local government settlement announcement as it affects the Council and the impact it's had on the initial estimate position, and also advises the committee of the proposed actions to achieve an overall balanced position. So I'd like to welcome the officers present and the leader to the meeting, and I'll hand over to the leader and to Andrew and Rob, who are in the chamber as well, to introduce the report. I don't know who's going to go first. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. The paper you see before you is very much the product of a team effort. The team have been working on the budget for the last 10, 11 months. It's a year-long process, working between cabinet members, directors, officers, working through. So what you're seeing here is the product of the work to date on there. I'll just do a little bit of an introduction. I'll hand over to Rob, who will take you through the detail.
Check a minute. Can I just check the members can hear you all right? All hear okay? Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, no, thank you. So as in previous years, any underspend will be used to top up reserves, which is an important principle. And as you're one fireman officer, I think that makes sense. That helps the financial resilience of the council. And also, as in previous years, any specific grants are passable through directed services, so make sure the money goes exactly where the grant's intended to go through. I could go on for a long time about the budget. It's my specialist subject, but I'll stop there, and if that's okay, hand over to Rob, who'll take you through the detail, but we'll be here to answer any specific questions.
Thank you. Rob?
Certainly. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. I'll just do a quick run through the report, pick out some of the key points. So starting with sort of section 5 of the report, which just gives a very, very brief overview of the latest in-year position. That's simply to provide context and a backdrop for this budget setting process that we're currently working through. As you'll see from the table in 5.1, we're currently forecasting, as at month 7, a favourable variance of 151,000, which is an improvement on that previously reported, mainly due to the receipt of additional in-year grant funding from Welsh Government, a large proportion of which was to cover costs that we'd already allowed for in our forecast. So effectively that just helped improve the bottom line straight away. So obviously that's a good position to be in. Our anticipation is that that will continue to improve between now and the end of the year, barring any major surprises emerging. And then sort of allied to what Andrew just said in terms of should we have a positive position at the end of the year, that will enable us to add to reserves and overall improve and increase the Council's financial resilience. So that's the in-year position. So then quickly moving to the 26-27 budget setting process. So since we last met as a committee, the main change that's happened is that we've had both the provisional and final settlement announcements from Welsh Government, the final settlement being announced on the 20th of January, reflective of the recent deal in the Senedd to get the budget through. So just picking out the key highlights. So on average across Wales, a like-for-like uplift at 4.5%, but actually for Torfaen individually it's 4.7%, which equates to a cash increase of 9.3 million against the adjusted base being after allowing for grant transfers. So that's considerably more than we were anticipating and modelling, so that's clearly a positive. In addition to that like-for-like increase, as I've just referenced, we also are seeing a number of one-off grants being transferred into the settlement for 26-27 onwards. They total just over £4 million and cover 5 different areas, the main ones being teachers' pay, the NJC pay grant I just referenced in terms of the in-year position, and most sort of significantly the money that we've had in the year to cover the employer's increase in national insurance contributions. So those grants will come in and also increase our overall funding, albeit in most cases there's been a cost attached to that funding, so it's sort of neutral in overall terms. The other things just to highlight from the settlement, as is often the case, we receive a list of grant figures from Welsh Government. They're appended to this report as Appendix 1. They are all Wales figures. Again, that's always the case. So we can't see with any great sort of certainty how we're affected by those announcements. However, you clearly get a sense of if a grant is being significantly cut or uplifted. And generally speaking, it doesn't appear as though any grants are facing significant reductions. Some are actually increasing ever so slightly. But ultimately, until we get our individual local authority allocations, we won't know for certain. But on the face of it, that looks okay. So taking those announcements into consideration, you'll recall that when we met previously, we disclosed a residual budget gap of just over £2.5 million at that point, based on our original assumptions around external funding and the outcome of the initial estimates exercise that had been undertaken. So I'm just at 6.3, 6.4 of the report. So starting with that £2.5 million budget gap, as is always the case, this is an iterative process, so we've had movements in both directions between now and then. We've confirmed our council tax base for the forthcoming year, which has added resources, but also there have been other pressures identified, and coincidentally the two figures offset themselves. But then in addition to that, we've identified £630,000 worth of additional positive adjustments relating to things like using different funding streams to cover certain pressures, looking at other ways to cover income shortfalls, and also, where relevant, other partner organisations to contribute their share of pressures being faced. So taking that all of those things into account, you'll see in 6.5 there's a table that gives the updated position post sorry, it says post-provisional settlement, it's actually post-final settlement. And you'll see that we've moved from that position of £2.5 million gap to a headroom of just over 3 million, 3,158, as you'll see at the bottom of that table. So obviously that presents quite a different picture to contend with. So what we've done off the back of that, as you most likely expect, is that we've looked at opportunities to address any risks within the budget and try and increase our financial resilience. So in 6.6, there's a table there of 3 items that have been incorporated into the proposed budget for next year to increase that resilience. One around mitigations from 25-26 that haven't necessarily not proved achievable but have been difficult to realise in cashable savings terms. And we've also made an additional allowance on the pay award because our 3% assumption is exactly that. At this stage, we don't know what the pay award for 26-27 will be, but given that inflation is hovering still around sort of 3% and just above, we feel it's prudent to allow for an additional 0.5% over and above what we were originally assuming. And also we factored in an allowance to undertake a review of the pay and grading structure for the lowest grades within our structure. And that's largely needed, and this will be needed in the majority of local authorities, because the real living wage increases at a faster rate than the NJC pay rates. It results in compression at the bottom end of the spine in particular, and you end up with the pay differentials that probably should be in place between certain grades and certain roles and responsibilities eroding and compressing, and eventually, that would lead to sort of grades assimilating to be the same. So an exercise needs to be undertaken to address that and create those differentials that were there previously. So we made an allowance for that. So those 3 items total just over 1.5 million, therefore leaving a residual balance for investment of just over 1.6 million. So then that's been considered in terms of the most appropriate and effective use of that headroom. And in the table in 6.7, you'll see a list of investment proposals that have been incorporated into the draft budget. They're all listed there. So one on the Phoenix project, one on family conflict service, an additional investment in apprentices, additional investment in support for people who are NEET, and also in terms of community capacity building, and additional ALN funding for schools. Actually, with the family conflict services, you'll see with the way the table's set out, we're actually proposing that we use reserves to fund that particular investment because of its anticipated investor-save nature. So those items there in totality come to 1.176 million. And once that's factored in, that facilitates a reduction in the proposed council tax increase from 4.95% to 3.95%. And that is the amount that the current budget proposal is based on. In 6.9, there is a list of everything that the budget buys, or the main things that the budget buys. Again, I'm not proposing to go through all of those, but some of the highlights include a £4.5 million increase to the school budget, which is about 5.5%. And then on top of that, the additional 346,000 on ALN investment that's also proposed. Sticking with schools, we're also establishing or proposing to establish an annual revenue budget to allow a fund to be built up to undertake the maintenance and replacement of school IT infrastructure, which is required in a few years' time, off the back of the EdTech programme that Welsh Government rolled out in and around 2019. There's also an increase in funding within adult social care, and that's to maintain services in line with the current levels of demand. And as I mentioned there's a new investment in apprentices, or proposed new investment in apprentices, but that's in addition to continuation of the 250,000 base budget that already exists for school leaver employment and the existing apprentice scheme. So just to conclude, we've got a section on risks. There aren't too many risks to highlight because we have had the final settlement earlier than we've had in recent years, so some of those risks have been taken away, but the one main one that remains is around specific grants. As I said earlier, until we get our individual allocations, we don't know for certain how we'll be impacted by those grant announcements. And again, as I referenced earlier, we still have that uncertainty with the pay awards, but that is the case in every year pretty much. And then the final part of the report just outlines the remaining steps between now and budget setting council meeting on the 3rd of March, including public engagement activity and cabinet meeting on the 24th of February to consider and put forward their final proposals to that council meeting on the 3rd of March. Okay, so happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Rob, for a succinct run-through. Before I ask members for any questions, I'll just ask if the leader has any comments or things he wishes to add in relation to the report.
Yeah, just to add some comments to what Rob has just said, taking us through the approach. Yeah, Rob correctly outlined the year-long process we take to the budget. We start, very early than most councils do. As soon as one budget is complete, I suspect we might have a meeting very soon on the 27-28 budget, so that we have that no surprises approach. And the approach very much is taking it cross-council rather than sort of setting departments off against each other, because I don't think that's a good thing in the long term either. That year-long process comprises the planning that's been mentioned. It's often very difficult because you're estimating things that you don't know. For example, how many resources you'll have, what the settlement will be, and of course what the demand and pressures are in services as well. But it's important that we both establish those estimates early and that it's an iterative process, that as we find out more information and we have those conversations during the year so that we can plug that into our planning as well. Because, as I say, the no surprises approach is very much based on the more we can have those conversations and make intelligent estimates, the better we can get at trying to manage things, rather than going along at one level and suddenly having to make big adjustments at the end that then cause some sort of tension in the system and don't lead to as good decisions really as well. And then Rob also mentioned, of course, the in-year management that's important so that it doesn't jeopardise the first bit of that planning, because, of course, big in-year variances jeopardise the planning for the next financial year, and we don't want to get into that situation. So I very much welcome the improved position that's mentioned in the budget reports. I welcome the in-year position that's balanced within £151,000 on a budget that amounts to £248 million is very close to an almost exact balance. I don't know what it is in percentage terms, but it's a tiny fraction of within 1% of the budget balancing, which, considering the number of variables there are in different departments and the number of variables there are with income as well, is an impressive achievement. So well done to officers for managing that. Also welcome the improvements in the 26-27 forecasts. The Welsh Government budget mentioned at paragraph 6.1 is welcome and makes a real difference to our ability to fund services going forward. So as Rob mentioned, that residual gap of £2.5 million that was mentioned in the last scrutiny report, already down from more than £10 million, and thanks to that work done over the year, now has a positive gap. And I think that, as Rob said, allows us to do three things that I'll mention. Firstly, to de-risk the budget to ensure that it's sustainable for future years. Paragraph 6.6 is important. I think that we do approach that process with prudence, so that we don't just make a budget that works this year and then has knock-on impacts that jeopardise services in future years. I think that's an important principle for us to be prudent in the way that we plan there. I very much welcome the approach officers in this authority take to that. It is, I suspect, in other authorities, a process that can result in over-caution and too much money being taken back away from members to make choices with, but I always feel that conversation in this authority is very balanced, and I get honest accounts of where risk lies from officers, so that we can make appropriate decisions there. So that's very much welcomed. Secondly, it gives us the chance to invest in key priorities. You'll see those listed in the reports. Schools, which members have always thought of as a priority in terms of a revenue budget, and that's very welcome that we can propose that again this year. Early intervention and prevention, both, I think, to get better outcomes for our populations. If you think of our county plan, you think of things like Marmot, very much trying to turn the dial to reduce demand in the medium and long term. And I think some of those interventions are key in that, dealing with some of the groups that we see the most demand in. The working communities, The support for ALN, which is an area that, that I think worries everyone working across local government, the demand in additional learning needs, I think is something that we have to work together to address, so I welcome that. And also the investment in the workforce, especially the lower end of the workforce. The work on apprentices, I think, is a great way of helping make our workforce more sustainable in the long term and give opportunities to local young people. So I very much welcome that. But it's also good for the council in terms of recruitment and retention, because it will both make our workforce more sustainable as well as being the right thing to do, but it will also cut our need to rely on short-term measures to get work in, like agency, for example. And thirdly, this gives us the opportunity to, I think, sustainably reduce the burden of council tax by reducing the council tax to 3.95%. I welcome the fact that we've now got the fourth lowest council tax in Wales and have had the lowest rises over 4 years. But more than that, I welcome the way that it's been done without jeopardising the future of the budgets. It's very easy to make knee-jerk decisions on council tax which come back to bite services in future years. I think we've done it in a way that's sustainable, and whilst recognising the burden of people who are having their costs rise all over the place, from energy bills to all sorts of things like insurance. So I think that's the right way to do it and the right balance for us to strike.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hunt. Before I go to members' questions, just to remind members of the opportunity to make recommendations during the course of discussion, should you wish to do so, or we have officers and the leader present, or we can formulate those at the end of discussions. So moving on to members' questions, I have Councillor Haynes first, then Councillor Ashley, then Councillor Janet Jones. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 4 questions. Do you want me to ask them one after the other?
And that would be helpful.
Yeah. Hello?
Hello, are you going to go through all 4 questions first, Councillor Haynes?
Yes, please. Okay.
Yep.
I'd just like to make a comment first on something the leader just said. He said that we are due to be starting the 27-28 budget process straight, after this is finished. I am hoping that officers have already got an eye on that ball, because if there's if funding fails this year, then we could be putting some services at risk if we've not got our eye already on the ball for the next year. And that's just a comment, really. Pay assumptions. The budget assumes a 3% pay award and only a 0.5% contingency. Apologies for my throat. What's the financial and service impact if pay awards are higher?
I think we've got that question. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to get all questions read first, and then, if you don't mind, officers, we can pick them up.
Okay. This is about grants. A significant number of grants remain unconfirmed or to be confirmed. What is the worst case financial exposure if allocations are lower than expected, and which services would be hit first? The next one is new investments are proposed in apprenticeships, needs support and preventative family services. What evidence shows that these investments will reduce demand on high cost services rather than simply add new spending pressures? The next one is about social care and its sustainability. Adult social care is funded to maintain services for around 950 clients. With growing wage and the demand pressure that brings, what happens if demand exceeds this level? And is there any real capacity left in the system? And I think there's one more really that you haven't already answered through going through the agenda. And it's more a political question really. Several pressures are being managed through use of service reserves. Is this delaying difficult decisions, and when will members see permanent solutions rather than temporary fixes?
Okay, I think that's very comprehensive. Thank you, Councillor Haynes. So I think, I don't know who'd like to start first with the first question. I think, is it Andrew or Rob? Rob.
Okay, so thank you for the question. So in terms of the first question around the pay award, yeah, obviously, as I outlined in the report, we've effectively allowed for 3.5% pay award in budget terms, in terms of recurring budget. We also hold a pay contingency in earmarked reserves as well. So in any individual year, we can cover a pay award that's slightly higher than our assumptions. Clearly, you know, there comes a point where it goes beyond that, but you know, we'd like to think, and we generally have been in the right territory in recent years. So I suppose if the pay award was higher than the 3.5% that we've effectively allowed for, the first, well, I suppose the very first thing we would do is see if we could manage that pressure in year anyway, because if we happen to have a favourable position, we would manage it that way. Otherwise, we'd call upon the reserve that we have in place for that very purpose. Obviously, there is, and there has been in recent years, external funding that has been forthcoming to support pay awards as well. Obviously, we can never guarantee, assume or rely upon that, but that has been the case in recent years. So we, you know, an impact upon services is sort of the very last thing that we would want to do. And what we would do is, if there was a higher pay award in year, or in the year that it's awarded, we'd manage it as best we could from one-off resources. We'd then factor it into our budget planning going forward. So you know, you made a reference at the beginning in terms of, you know, are we looking at future years? Well, the answer is yes, we are looking at future years always. You know, we've got a 4-year medium-term plan. So we're already building in assumed pay awards in those future years as well. We'd obviously have to increase those assumptions. And then that will become part of the conversation around budget, balancing the budget in future years. But like I said, hopefully the impact on services would be minimised as much as possible, or ideally avoided by use of those other mitigations in the first place.
Thank you. Okay, I know there was a next question, I think was relating to worst case scenario with grants. So I don't know who's going to pick that up. Andrew, thank you.
If I pick up the question about grants, it's a very helpful question on there, and as you've picked up, quite often at this point in the budget setting process, not all of those grants have been confirmed, so we've made some assumptions in the budget setting process. And some of those grants we may not get the number confirmed for a number of months, because some of them don't follow the normal financial year cycle, so the budget is based upon a series of assumptions. I don't have the exact figure of what the total exposure will be. It will be a significant sum, we can work that out, but it will be very unlikely that all grants we were due to receive stop in those. And it is likely we may get some new grants coming through the year, so as part of the process, there's a bit of give and take in that process. Which services are hit, would be hit if the grants were stopped? Well, where specific grants are for specific services, clearly we would have to have a conversation about that service, but again, that's why we hold reserves, so we will give us time to rethink, work out what is our best way of dealing with that. Some of that may be trying to reprioritise services. It could be that we'll have to take a policy decision to change that service. So I haven't got a specific list of those services, but where we've got grants for specific activities, they're the ones in scope. What we're not allowed to do is to take a grant for one purpose and move it to something else. So that's quite clear within the grant rules.
I think there was a question in relation to apprenticeships and potential adding to spending pressures. I don't know who wants to pick that one up. Rob, I think.
So if I recall correctly, the question was generally about the new investments, and is there a risk that they could simply just increase pressure? So I suppose just taking one as an example, and Jason as Strategic Director of Children and Families may also comment on this, but obviously I referenced in the report the fact that the Family Conflict Service is one area that's being proposed as a new investment. That is entirely around trying to manage demand and hopefully reduce demand at the front door. And by managing that conflict, it's sort of a preventative approach that gets in early, and ultimately I say ideally would be an invest to save, but at least, if nothing else, would manage the kind of ever-growing pressure in those sorts of areas. So I think, you know, all those investments have got a purpose. It's not simply a case of, well, there's money there, so let's find something to spend them on. But yeah, I don't know, do you want to comment on that?
I think if I bring Jason in, and maybe Jason
Thank you, Rob.
can
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Yeah, I think what we're seeing in terms of some of our investment, our early intervention investment, our preventative investment within children's social care particularly, in the last 3 years we've seen a significant decrease in our children looked after population. Prior to that, we'd seen a continued increase, so we've seen a significant decrease there. So that's shown that our investment in some of our early intervention and changes to some of our structures to focus more upon prevention and early intervention is really having a significant impact. It's not just having an impact upon our numbers of children looked after, it's having an impact on our outcomes for children, because we know that outcomes for children looked after aren't particularly good. So in keeping children out of the system, we're improving outcomes for them. And as Rob alluded to when he was going through the report, that we're evidencing financial savings as well as a result of that early investment and in that early intervention process.
I think the next one would probably be due as well, Jason, which was the adult social care question from Councillor Haynes.
Sorry, Councillor Haynes, could you ask that question again for me, the adult social care one specifically?
Of course. Adult social care is funded to maintain over 950 clients with growing wage and demand pressures that brings. What happens if demand exceeds this level, and is there any real capacity left in the system?
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. There is capacity left within the system. We've reviewed adult social care quite significantly in the last 24-18 months. To reconfigure it so we've got a greater focus on reablement and again, you know, keeping people out of the system. There is capacity within the system because that's in its early stages there, and we would hope and anticipate again that our investment in early intervention and prevention and reablement within the adult services sector as well will impact upon that going forward.
I think Councillor Hunt would like to add a little.
Yeah, just to a few of those. Firstly, on the first point about the medium-term financial plan that Rob made, yeah, it's right that we always keep an eye on that as well as the forthcoming budgets to check that decisions we make don't artificially open up a gap in sort of years 2, 3 and 4 in that. I think that's important. On the question about new investments, I think there's always sort of two categories of measure that we have to evaluate slightly differently there. There's one sort of category of measure that if we do X, it will save Y, and you can it's a financial calculation because you can see that if you invest, I don't know, £1 million in this machine, it will save £100,000 a year of demand over there. And those are quite easy to sort of evaluate on a cost-benefit sort of analysis because you can see where the payback is. It's more difficult, obviously, to work out, if you look at the table in 6.7, about the payback of those things, both in terms of improved outcomes, but also in terms of reducing and stemming demand. So I think it's key looking at those in paragraph 6.7 that we look, you know, to both categories of savings. There are things that we can do that take out a defined amount, but there are other things that we can do that the evidence that officers gives us suggests will improve outcomes and reduce demand. And then on the last one about managing pressures through service reserves, I think it's a good point that we need to make sure that we don't just put off difficult decisions using reserves. But I think we've got a good track record of doing that. If you look at the Children's Services Transformation work, that's a piece of work that we funded in a similar way, that is now being shown to reduce long-term pressures in that area. But you're right that it's something that we should always keep an eye on, and we should never use reserves or other figures to try and address revenue pressures in a way that's not sustainable.
Thank you very much. I hope that's answered your questions, Councillor Haynes. I'll move on to Councillor Ashley. next, and then followed by Councillor Janet Jones. Councillor Ashley. Can't actually hear you, Councillor Ashley.
That better? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had the headphones on. I don't think they were loud enough. I'm struggling a little bit on this because Councillor Haynes actually very neatly asked part of the question I wanted, which was about Pacific grants.
That's good.
I might repeat a bit on this. Pardon me, Chair, if I do, but it's a question I think I've asked annually on this. With the Pacific grants, we have got a lot of work sort of riding on it. Some of it's not a lot, and some of it's a huge amount. I'm looking at community and environmental projects that ride on that, and we've got quite a lot of stuff that, as you said in 7.2, not knowing when it's likely to happen. We've also have annual grants for things like allotments, with which I'm chair, and the frustration that people have, officers and recipients, on things like this. I welcome hearing that maybe there's possibility we could look at riding that over. It's timescales, because we always seem to get this thing, you've got to spend the money next week kind of thing. I welcome to hearing what Andrew said. I just wonder, bearing in mind that a lot of how much work of this type have we got riding on stuff like that, bearing in mind we've got the deal and the county plan. A lot of the community and environmental aspects seem to be this. I wonder what your views are on that, please. I know you were given some already, but it probably needs a little bit more detail. And the detail is always in the explanation, not what's written down here, in my experience of this process.
Okay. I think we've had a fairly substantive response in relation to the grants. And I'm also mindful that we don't want to drop into too much detail because we're taking a high-level overview here. But I will bring Councillor Hunt in, who is willing to respond.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Stuart. No, I agree. I think I've got a three-stage approach to specific grants. One, to Welsh Government, please bring them into the settlement where possible. Let's try and avoid micromanagement. Instead, let's set objectives together and trust each other and give each other the freedom to deliver on those objectives, especially where the grants are smaller amounts, because, as you know, otherwise you do get into a situation where, you know, grants can cause a lot of work for smaller amounts of money, shall we say. So secondly, if they can't just be rolled into the settlement, can they be amalgamated where possible, so they are bigger sums, you know, rather than small sums that need to be dealt with. And thirdly, early information is always better, because that avoids surprises. It avoids the situation that we have had in other areas where, you know, staff are dealt a very uncertain hand if they're paid for by grants. And I don't like that, because that's not nice for anyone trying to make a difference to the local area if they don't know from month to month if they're going to have a job. So early information will be the other principle that I'd say. I don't know if any officers want to add any detail to that.
No, I think that's very helpful. And I would note or observe that obviously having these different elements within the county plan gives us a focus in terms of what we're seeking to achieve and how we're seeking to do it. So hope that helps, Councillor Ashley.
May I come back, Chair, very briefly? Yes, sat in the allotments committee waiting for the settlement Councillor Hunt, it's a small amount. That's a small amount of money, but very important to the participants. And it's those small amounts of money which are probably more tricky for officers to deal with than the large amounts. Thank you for that reply, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you very much. So I'll move on to Councillor Janet Jones.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure if I've missed it because I was a bit late joining the meeting. Can we have assurance in this budget that we consider financial support for our third sector buildings owned by Torfaen Council but run by volunteers? And the second item is, are we reliant on grants entirely from Welsh Government and other sources for the new proposed waste transfer station? although it's not going to be effect for a couple of years, are we having to rely on funding for that from grants or from Welsh Government, please?
Okay, I think those are helpful questions. I don't know who'd like to do an initial response. Rob, I think, is going to say a couple of points, and I think the leader would want to come in with a couple of points after. Rob?
Yeah, I'm actually going to answer the second question first, if that's okay, around the waste transfer station. So I suppose, in terms of that project, it's still, obviously the site has been acquired, but it is still generally in its infancy. There is an existing budget within the capital programme, which is made up of council resources. We have also, and I think it is referenced in the report somewhere, looking to utilise or take benefit of the resources being given to us in connection with recycling via the UK government to create an enhanced council budget towards that scheme. But ultimately, there will be a requirement for external grant funding. We're not under any illusion of that, but those conversations are happening, and there is funding that is potentially available specifically for these sorts of purposes. So the intention ultimately is to create a funding package comprising both our own resources, of which we've pretty much identified what we feel we require, but it will need to be supplemented by Welsh Government funds ultimately.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay, so the first part of that, which was actually about supporting and maintaining, I think, council buildings that are potentially run by volunteers. I think that was just
a community buildings,
so
yes.
I'll go to Councillor Hunt initially.
Okay, I don't know if Andrew wants to come in as well, but that's something I'm certainly very passionate about, and I would hope that we could continue to provide support that we have done this year for third sector organisations, community groups, to help them with their buildings. Obviously, we will never have as much money to support organisations as we'd want to, but that's certainly something I'd hope. We've used different mechanisms this year to help do that in many areas, and I'd hope we can continue to do that next year.
Okay, and then I think Andrew...
That's good to hear, Anthony, because they're a vital part of our communities.
Yep, and I think Andrew would like to add something now.
I'll just echo the leader's comments. It's an important mechanism to enable deliver services to our communities using the third sector organisation that use our business. We are a Marmot Council, so very much how we support people through those arrangements, and very much under community, locality-based approach. And also the deal, which is now starting to become through, exactly supports that. So there is certainly money within the budgets to support those buildings. As the leader said, we have to be very careful of managing that money, but there is enough money in the system to pay the grants.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Anthony. That's reassuring.
That's great. Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. I'll move to Councillor Seaborn. I've got Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. Obviously, having a few speakers before me has pinched my glory, but I'll see if I can siphon through them. I'm really pleased to hear about the school maintenance fund being set up. We've long awaited a maintenance fund for any of our buildings, let alone just the schools. And the one question is, what impact assessment has been undertaken regarding the assumption that schools can absorb non-pay inflation, sorry. That's the one. Then the other one is on the current levels of reserves, and what are the current levels of general and year-marked reserves, and what level of the reserve drawdown is proposed for the next financial year, 26-27. And my third question is, how will the impact of new investment areas be monitored and reported during 26-27? We've got a list of in 6-7 of the new investment proposals. How will these be monitored? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful questions. Looking at officers to see who's going to put their hand up for this one first. I think Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the schools maintenance fund, I think it's an important capacity to do that, and this is mentioned around the IT, but across all of our property portfolio, the team are looking very much to put in place sinking funds to cover those repairs and to have a better plan than we've currently got. I'm predicting those repair needs. It's better to maintain things than to have to repair them, so that's the direction of travel. In terms of the impact assessment for the schools grant, I'm not close to the details. I'll have to go away and check on those, but we have done an impact assessment and we've had engagement with the head teacher community, and it's a process we've used before, so we're not proposing to change the policy. So it's a well-trodden path we're treading in that area.
Oh, okay. Did anybody else want to add to that? Councillor Hunt?
Thanks, Chair. Before Rob comes in on the other questions, yeah, I welcome the school maintenance fund. I think the engagement that Jason and Andrew do with school leaders now in terms of the revenue budget support means that I think schools in Torvine feel that they're given, you know, a chance of succeeding. Jason wants to say more, and certainly the position we find ourselves in with regards to deficit budgets, for example, is a lot better in Torvine than it is in other areas, partly as a result of that. So I think in terms of revenue budgets, if you look at the league tables, year on year, we've moved in the right direction in terms of funding our schools. The challenge, I guess, we have is more on the capital side and how we can continue to meet the contribution rates that we need to make towards 21st century schools. I think we've done a lot over the last 20 years of investment in the fabric of our school buildings, but there are gaps there still, especially in some of our secondary schools, that I'd love to be able to see filled. You know, if you look at Abersucken or Westmon or St Albans and Cwmbran High and Cwmbran as well, there's things that I'd love to do to be able to improve the fabric of those schools. How we work together with Welsh Government on that in a sustainable way, I think is a key question. But in terms of the revenue budgets of schools, I'm confident that we've done a lot of good work to get them into as good a place as possible. Whilst, of course, schools are, you know, I'd always like to give more money to schools. I think members have put them as a top priority.
Okay, thank you. I think Jason would like to add a little.
Just to add to what the leader and Andrew have said then, I mean, our relationship with the head teachers through our links with our lead financial officers is continued. So we don't just keep an eye on this from an annual basis. We look at this in a medium to longer term basis as well in terms of that revenue funding. So we're not just teeing schools up year on year on year. We've got more of a longer term vision with the schools as well. And again, the work that our lead financial officers do with the schools, with the head teachers in terms of that planning, that revenue plan is exceptional. And I think we are, as the leaders pointed out, we're in a very good position with our finance settings with the schools.
Thank you for that. You're okay with that, Councillor Seaborn?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I think praise should be given to the school finance officers. They do a really good job. Thank you.
I think we'd all agree with that. So I'm going to move on to the next question. I think Rob was going to say a little bit about reserves. Apologies.
Okay. No, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Seaborn. We'll ensure that those compliments are passed on to the relevant officers. That's really positive to hear. Just in terms of, just to actually conclude on that previous discussion, just to give a bit more assurance, hopefully, that 300,000 that schools will be required to absorb is in the context of an £80 million budget. So it's not to say that makes it easy, but hopefully gives a sense that, you know, it's a relatively small ask in the context of the whole budget. But just talking about reserves specifically, so our total level of reserves at the conclusion of the previous financial year was just over £36.5 million. Our expected usage in this financial year, in theory, stands at around £5 million, and some of that will be a reduction, anticipated reduction in school balances as well. However, our anticipation is given the way that the in-year position is moving in that positive direction, that the actual call on those reserves may be possible to reduce, and we should be able to replenish certain reserves as part of the year-end process as well. In terms of next year's budget, just to hopefully give some reassurance around that, in terms of use of reserves in balancing the budget, it comes to around £1 million. However, and this is particularly relevant with the Children's Services proposal, all of those proposed uses of reserves are to fund a transitional arrangement or to give the necessary time for transformation to take place. So using children's services as the example, in this current financial year, given the position the service was in a year ago, there is circa £1.9 million of transitional funding available. And then the idea was that that would reduce to the 600,000 we're proposing next year. But actually, as it happens, in terms of this year, the service is calling on nowhere near the amount that's been made available. So that residual 600,000 was always part of a plan that from 27/8 onwards it wouldn't be required at all. But actually, to the service's credit, they are well ahead of that plan as well. So even though we have use of reserves earmarked in connection with the budget, none of it is simply there to just underpin the budget because we don't know what else to do. It's solely where it's being used for a kind of targeted, specific purpose and only on a transitional basis. Clearly, if that didn't prove achievable, that would create a budget pressure in future years. But that is where we are now. So hopefully that gives a bit of reassurance around the reserves position.
Thank you, Rob. That was a very helpful, comprehensive response. I hope you're okay with that, Councillor Ashley. Sorry, Councillor Seaborn. Councillor Ashley
Yes.
is next.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you.
Well, it's me.
So,
it's me.
Councillor Ashley, then I have Councillor Williams in the chamber.
I haven't had an answer on my third question, sorry.
Oh,
Chair.
sorry. No, you get there, Rose.
The third question was, how will the impact of the new investment areas be monitored and reported during 26-27?
Andrew's going to come back on that one.
Thank you for the question. As you can see in the paper, we've tried to link those investments to how they fit into the deal and the missions within the deal to give a bit of clarity of where that money will be invested. We will be bringing back to Cabinet, through the normal reporting process, updates on those missions within the deal structure. So you'll see there the reports going to Cabinet updating on progress and the impact those investments will have.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll now move to Councillor Ashley, then I have Councillor Williams in the chamber and Councillor Colette Thomas. Councillor Ashley?
It looks like I've been slightly pipped at this again, but I wanted the Pacific more than the investment side of it. The ALN in the investments, ALN, I can't even say the word, sorry. How would that develop? Was there likely to be money for it in future years? Is a question for that one. Bearing in mind the need that's been expressed for that, and is that likely to be school specific or service specific? And then the next one was NEETs, because I see those two meshing together, to be honest, because if you've got ALM problems with children, some of them end up being NEETs. And the capacity service, how does that function? Again, my previous question about grants, etc., that would obviously then end up in the community service. So there's a linkage there. It's really, really exciting, this, looking at it, but it needs continuity money. And I'd love to hear an explanation. But do you see that as kickstarting something, or is that a one-off?
Okay. I think that relates to item 6.7 and the investment areas quite clearly. Yeah. I don't know which officer would like to come in.
It was 6.7, Dave.
I think the first bit was about whether the ALN funding was just this year or whether there's going to be a rolling forward, if I summarise that. And the second bit was actually about the increased capacity, which is noted in terms of two capacity builder posts coming into that area as part of the investment proposal. But anything officers would like to offer on that one?
If I try and cover the ALN grant or the ALN money is there, that's for the longer term vision. Obviously, we know we're always going to have that's going to be an area of need for us and an area of demand for us. So that funding there is with a longer term vision as well. We've done a lot of work with the schools, so the money is we've done a lot of work with schools in terms of reviewing their ALN budgets and the way within which schools are funded, with an eye again in terms of I guess that longer term vision. To challenge and impact upon ALN and that increasing need that we're seeing within the service.
Thank you for that. Is that okay, Councillor Ashley? Helpful? Yep. Okay, I'll move on to Councillor Williams here in the chamber.
I did have a further question on that, Councillor Williams. One of the things is, with the ALNs, would there be any capacity in there for developing any community services? This is what I was trying to get to, because if you start in schools, the community element of it needs and community services. Have you looked at any of that at all? I was going to ask you that question. I'm well aware of what happens in this field.
I think if I'm hearing that correctly, Councillor Ashley, yes, there is capacity to develop that further out within the community. And if you think of, I guess, some of the work we're doing with the deal, and particularly the missions that we've highlighted within the deal, there's a key focus there, particularly around community-focused schools. So really branching out further into the community to resolve some of that level of need and some of those issues that we experience within that ALN cohort.
Okay, perhaps I could draw members'
attention. That goes there. Thank you, Chair.
I could draw members' attention to the fact that we have another cross-cutting scrutiny on the 17th, which is looking towards the deal, so there'll be an opportunity to pick up there. I will now go to Councillor Williams in the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to say how very good it is to see that these investment proposals have been directed towards some of the most vulnerable groups in our society, both in terms of prevention and services, which is, I think, extremely commendable. Very simple question. So how soon would these 5 projects and services get to be aware of the increased funding so that they themselves can start doing some forward planning with these projects? That's my question.
Okay, I think that's pretty clear. Obviously, we have to agree, or the Council has to agree, these investment proposals, but would anyone like to come in? Perhaps Jason?
I think, as Chair's pointed out, I think once we go through the process of agreement, then we've got that formal indication then of how we're able to allocate this funding. At the moment, it's obviously tentative until we've gone through that process, but it's clearly a priority area for us, or they're clearly priority areas for us.
So I think you're ready to hit the ground running as soon as you get the okay. Yep, great. Okay, so I'll move on to Councillor Colette Thomas, and then I have Councillor Stuart Kite in the chamber.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to 6.7, the investment proposals. I'd like a little bit more information on the £400,000 investment for apprentices and some clarification on the support package to sustain employment, please.
Okay, I don't know who'd like to pick up on that. Andrew.
Thank you for the question. The proposal is that we create a cohort of young people who come and be apprentices within the council. This group will not be aligned to particular services in the first instance. It'll be about getting them used to coming in to work for the council. They will get exposure to different parts of the council, and they will work out areas they're interested in, and will divert them into those arrangements. And we hope that they will then, through their apprenticeship, will apply for jobs as they become a vacant and build their career within the council. In terms of the support package, we recognise for a number of young people it's quite a step change to come from education to join the workforce, those arrangements, so it may well be that they may need some help with things like bus fare or appropriate work clothes and those type of things. So that support package, there will be an officer dedicated to supporting and being their mentor, making sure that cohort gets the best experience about making transition from probably from an education into the work environment and to understanding how the council works and what works well for them.
I think that's very helpful. I know Councillor Hunt would like to add a little to that.
Yeah, this is something that's very close to both mine and the Chief Executive's heart, certainly. I think the work we've done is us trying to show that apprenticeships can be a good lever for inclusive growth, workforce sustainability and social mobility. And I know this will enable, I think there's 24 new apprentices so far, and this would enable another 12 from April. I know we're very keen to target underrepresented groups, for example, looked after children population, some pupils who've struggled to engage at school but have got a real passion for public service, and take those pupils through with a sort of a holistic sort of view of the organisation to talk about what they're interested in, where their skills lie, so they can grow to become, public service deliverers and leaders of the future, rather than just putting them specifically in one job and sort of leave them there. This is a way for them to grow into the organisation, maybe get a holistic view across the organisation, then be able to go forwards. So I think that's important for sustainability of our workforce as well. We are wary that our workforce is ageing, and this is a way. It would be good to maybe get some of the apprentices to speak with members about how they've both benefited from being part of the organisation, but they've also added value to the organisation in key places where they've been able to give a different perspective. So that the way that that's being done, I think, is as important in a way as what it is too. So I really welcome, if we could secure this investment in that going forwards. I think that does, contribute to so many of the parts of the deal, of our missions, as well as, I think, strengthening our workforce too.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, just one observation, if I could make. One of the things that I think is beneficial in relation to this is obviously an openness to work placements as a preliminary, perhaps, to apprenticeships, from having had that direct experience myself in a previous existence. It helps to sort of open the door for people, so I'll just note that as something for consideration. Sorry, Councillor Kite, sorry, you've been very patient. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to come back to the initial savings that, well, that's wrong, that we've shown a 151,000 loss, I would say, which is an improvement that we were on the initial position. Yes, correct? The question I'm sort of asking is whether this is an improvement, i.e. the loss is 151,000 as opposed to being higher. But is this down to one-off windfalls? And I notice as well, looking at section of the table on 6.5, yes, well, we've got a housing benefit surplus here, 178,000, I think is one. There's a housing benefit surplus, 178,000. That comes to the figures of 151,000. If you look at it, the figure on the table here, we go, right, let's have a look. Here we go, yes, sorry, table 5.1, yeah? 5.1, yeah, and it's got there, we've got a housing benefit surplus of, I think, 178,000. Yeah, which has moved towards producing 151,000, yeah? We're talking about the saving. Isn't that right?
Sorry, is that okay?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Go on.
I think yeah, if Councillor Hunt seeks to clarify the point, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair. I'm trying to be of help. If you're looking at the table in paragraph
5.1.
5.1, yeah. The figures in brackets are favourable variances.
Yeah.
And correct me, officers, if I'm wrong here. And so therefore underspend. The figures that aren't in brackets are adverse variances. So we're 178,000 over the housing benefit subsidy figure at the moment. But the overall figure is a favourable variance of 151,000 across. Yeah.
So the point I'm trying to get to, right, is on this variance of 151,000, how much of that is down to one-off windfalls, i.e. subsidies, using the reserve loan? Is this a permanent trend, i.e. is this permanently, are we going to see the trend of our financial budgets? Or are these one-offs, are this grants from Wales and so forth, masking the underlying true nature of the budget itself? I.e., right, that if we weren't lucky and we didn't have these one-offs or these windfalls or these subsidies, then the underlying budget, right, would be somewhat different. So what I'm trying to say is that, have we been lucky?
Okay, I think I'm sure that there'll be officers willing to come back on that one. I think it's helpful to have both the service area position and the overall position, but obviously there can be a bit of a masking of what happens with one in relation to the whole. Who wants to come in on this first? Andrew, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So if I start on that, I'm not sure I'd use the word lucky, but I can understand the sentiment where you're coming from. And I think, as the leader said at the beginning of the meeting, our revenue budget is about £248 million. So a very large budget on there. And it is a bit like landing a jumbo jet on a postage stamp, because a lot of these things are driven by assumptions, driven by demands. We can have some bad weather. We can have people becoming more poorly than we were expected, or less poorly. So there's lots of things that will move during the year. The £151,000 surplus is a very small percentage of that. Yeah. So I don't think we've been lucky. I think we've made some reasonable assumptions that we've used to set the budget a year ago, and we've talked to you about the assumptions we're setting this year on there. There will be some grants that come through from Welsh Government we weren't expecting, but they tend to be quite small. The majority of those we are anticipating where they will be, and they're built into that base budget. So the recurring position, and I'm comfortable as your 151 officer of the council, the budget that was set for last year and the one we're proposing is a reasonable and cautious budget. I would describe it as cautious rather than lucky. But there is an element of factors that are outside of our control. If Stephen were here, he would be very clear about being a Marmot council, and the deal is helping to manage that demand because we're helping people and supporting people to live as healthy as possible.
Well, thank you for that. Right, apologies for that. I misheard. I thought you said we had a 151,000 deficit rather than surplus, but I think, considering the size of the figures, as you rightly say, 151,000 isn't a great shake. But thank you for clarifying the point. But the point I'm trying to make at, were we lucky with these windfalls, or is this, as we can see, is a permanent trend? And you seem to think that this is how things will move forward, correct?
That's how I understand it, Councillor Kite, but I know Councillor Hunt would like to respond as well, so I'll give him the opportunity.
No, Andrew used a different analogy. I was saying it's like trying to land a helicopter on an aircraft carrier. There's various things that you have to sort of anticipate with the waves and the movements of the aircraft carrier and the wind as the helicopter tries to land. I would say, if you look back over previous years, then I think we've got a good track record. This isn't a one-off, that we have managed to land that within a reasonable percentage figure at the end of the year in the budget. Of course, you don't want the variation to be too much in either direction, because if it's too much of an adverse variation, it affects the budget for the next year, because you've got a deficit of money going into the new year. But of course, if the adverse is favourable and too much, it means have you been too cautious with some of your presumptions? But certainly, if you look back over the last certainly 3 to 4 years, and I think I think I can make a reasonable case that it's not just lucky shots, that we're good at anticipating the variances. But I don't know if Jason wants to say more.
I was just going to comment just specifically again on the children's services issue and the planning that sat behind that to manage the budget there. So what we've seen, and what we've seen continually over the last 12 months, is a reduction in that level of demand there in defined cohorts where there was significant spend as well. And our projection going forward is a continued reduction there because of some of the service changes we've made. So, and that hasn't been as a result of any sort of, I guess, fortuitous grant money falling at our feet. That's been as a result of a systems redesign there.
So as I would say, right, these are permanent savings going forward, rather than just one-off. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I should have put my microphone on. Apologies. I see no more hands, but one observation, if I might make, because I think the Chair's allowed to ask the odd question as well. I notice in the investment proposals there's some reference to different missions within the deal, but I'm also conscious that this engagement process with citizens is going on, and we may see some things emerge from that which are seen as citizen priorities. Have we some provision in our budget setting for consideration of this? I don't expect it to be huge amounts of money, but I do think it may be something that we need to demonstrate. You said we did. So I can just put that there. If anybody would like to offer an observation from officers, then it would be welcome. Andrew.
Thank you, Jack. And it's a very valid point because the consultation process is ongoing. We wanted to put it into this report because this ultimately will end up at council in a few weeks' time, so when hopefully the consultation will come a little bit clearer of people's views, and we've got citizen assembly process that's also ongoing on there. What we've been very clear with people is that the council is prepared to listen to those things. There are a number of elements where, because we've got members' choice, reserved a number of opportunities to fund opportunities that are identified through these processes.
Do you want to come in, Anthony?
No, I think it's a very good point that we need to be prepared to be, whilst we need to have financial planning, it's always the balance, isn't it? You want to have financial planning in place, but you don't want to be so rigid and straitjacketed that if people come up with, as you say, part of the deal is trying to meet communities halfway. And in my experience over the last decade, I've found that very often, if we can release communities to do things, they can deliver much better value for money than necessarily we could try to do something directly. So I think that it's a valid point to make that we need to make sure we've got the flexibility, whilst our budgets are carefully planned, that we can you know, if people make those good suggestions about how we can move things forward, like the Marmot objectives, then we need to be willing to meet them part of the way as a council, certainly.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So, members, I see no more hands. So I'd say thank you, members, for your questions. Thank you to the leader and the officers for the in-depth responses. I think there are a lot of very good questions coming from members, and so I thank you for that. Would the officers or the leader like to make any concluding comments before we invite you to leave? I'm sure you'd like to get out as quickly as possible, probably, but okay. So, members, I'll allow the officers to leave, and then we can consider if there are any recommendations we would want to make. Okay, so in terms of agreeing recommendations, I just need to remind you all that the meeting is still in formal proceedings and still being webcast. So can I see if there's any specific recommendations that members would like to highlight, or else I can perhaps seek to summarise one or 2 points. Councillor Seaborn?
Thank you, Chair. I think there's one on the performance management of the investment. I think the officer said they'd report back to Cabinet. I think it should come to scrutiny before going to Cabinet.
I think that's a fair point. I think it should be. We should have a report back to cross-cutting. Yep. So that's noted. Any other comments or observations? Okay. I think the only one I was going to pick up on was, I think a couple of members asked the point about position with reserves, both service-specific and totality, and I think that would be helpful for consideration in future reports, so you know what we're talking about in terms of what the draw on is. That would be my only point that I picked up as a possible one, and I think that was. Yeah, and I suppose my point was also about sort of if there are the identification of potential things coming out of the deal process to have some funding available. I was fairly assured, but okay.
I did put my hand up.
Sorry, Councillor Ashley, carry on.
Yeah, the business, I think I come up with it every year about the short-term funding and officers, that indications of when, I think this Ains, I don't know if she's still on the call, but she brought it up as well about the indications on short-term funding and timescales. It would be good for members because we're quite fond of those schemes that we know when they're happening and get an idea of when they're happening. I always worry about them personally. Maybe a recommendation that we need to know about that.
I'm trying to.
You get for better form of words than me, Dave. You're better at it.
Okay. So I think what you're saying is that if there are impact factors that are coming into play,
that's a good one.
We need to have an early alert to see the impact to budget. Is that
roughly? It's everything. It's everything from allotment committees right through to things that are happening on the ground. You know, and I remember all the time. It's quite often quite small sums of money. He was right about that.
And I think there's also the point that was actually prudent management of reserves that Councillor Haynes made, that we're not reliant upon it. Yeah. So I think perhaps if I could extend the suggestion around reserves to, you know, that we understand what's being added to reserves at the end of each financial year as well. Does that seem sensible for people? Yeah. Okay. Are we content that...
No, Chair, I have another point to make. I think we should have a clear breakdown of what is a recurring versus a non-recurring measure to use to plug the gap. Sometimes, you know, you're having these year on year and we don't realise whether they're or not they're a one-off or a recurring. So in future, I think we should have, you know, this is recurring or this isn't.
Okay, so I think in summary, and Councillor Kite's agreeing with you, I think it's actually about we need to know what are the long-term or ongoing recurring impacts. Obviously, Jason explained the position being taken with children's services that this was a time-bound one and it was reducing, but we need to have that assurance about other streams.
Yes.
Stuart.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rose. Right, you've just succinctly explained exactly what I was trying to say. Whether or not this is the real budget, or are there things happening to this budget that is masking the real underlying reality of the budget itself, i.e. the one-offs, the subsidies, using the reserves. So thank you for that. And I think as councillors, we really do want to know that. Otherwise, we don't know what real reality is, do we?
No. Thank you.
Point taken, and we've made a note of that. So thank you very much. Any other things, members? Okay. I apologise in advance in that I cannot see your hands because I'm in sight variation mode. I'm going to be doing that very soon, let me assure you. So if I've missed anybody, please say. No, I don't think I have. So, okay. We were invited to examine the contents of this report and make comments and recommendations for consideration by the Cabinet. Niall, not Niall, Geraint. I think we've got, what, 3 or 4 points? Would you like to illuminate those? So we have those points. We'll get those out to everybody to check that we've collated it correctly. If that's the case, then all I need to do is move to item 6, which is the date of the next meeting. And as I referred to earlier, we're coming back on the 17th of February, cross-cutting, to scrutinise the deal and the county plan delivery plan. So I think that some of the questions we've had here will have some currency in that discussion as well. So thank you very much, members, for your inputs. Much appreciated. Have a good afternoon.